So naturally, if you're reading along, you'll know that there's three main stories. Well, it could be four main stories right now. You've got Shep dealing with the avalanche with his dog Buster, also dealing with Matt Dill's request to leave Fort Worth and to go to Alaska Fairbanks with, of course, the Interceptor and the dog. Get out of town, basically. Can no longer communicate with Matt Dill. Barely can even communicate with the Lone Star Hacker. But he gets there safely, and then the avalanche happens. Later, he does get attacked by a polar bear, and we'll get to that later. Little subplot there with two characters, two state troopers that are Alaskan state troopers known as Al Greenwood and Jonah Samuel Camden III, who, if you're interested in his backstory, there's about a 967-page novel called Escape from Maine. Is that the same Jonah Samuel Camden III? Well, yeah, it is, but it's him in the future, because this takes place right now. That was finished up, pretty much patched that up between 2012 and a couple years after that. I started it in 2012 and patched it up in 2014 or so. Finished it up mostly in Maine in 2013. Came here, patched up a little ending to it. But now I know the ending. It slowly becomes Alaskan State Trooper. It was loosely based on me, but Jonah, it was a fictional character. So, you know, at the time I was starting off on long novels. No go-karts. Okay. And that's Rockwood today. I guess it's a little cold out. So, we also know that there's another story besides Shep, the Shep side of Alaska. There's another story that deals with Daniel Kopex, which is, his full name is Daniel Lucius Kopex. He's the NYPD cop that had some risky stuff go on a kind of a group meet thing. He got in trouble, got let go of NYPD, and started going around wandering the nation as different cops in different departments. But he could do it because he knew how to hack. He was basically a computer genius. And he's also a little bit like very distant characterization of maybe like almost like Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs kind of thing. He's a real big nut. He's a real big nut. Hangs out this weird place that's underground where these ladies dance around with angel wings and stuff like that. He likes to drive around the north side wearing this little red hat. And he lives at the top of the tower over there on the 35th floor of the tower in Fort Worth. So he's got a little bit of backing with some money. We don't know what he's involved, but he's a really weird one. He gets busted later by RIB, which is Revolutionary Independent Branch. It brings us to the Dwarf, was definitely the third story. The Dwarf was once a high school drama teacher that got hooked on Breaking Bad sauce and ended up on the sidewalk. Met Lady Shelby, who was also had some problems, and he eventually adopted a dog named Whiskers, which is a German Shepherd, that later gets killed by the Man in Blue because, well, they tasered him wrong. He sues the police department and gets millions, and then takes a little bit of that money and puts it in Wall Street, becomes like Elon Musk almost. Very powerful guy that starts the Revolutionary Independent Branch, which basically they feel, because it's a militia, they have the right to investigate anybody, regardless of rank, department. They'd even investigate NCIS if they wanted to. They investigate anybody they want. And so that's where Dwarf, which is basically his name is, well, he gives his name. Chester's one of it. But his real, his username, or the name, his alias is Doc Shelby. Lady Shelby also has an alias too. They're both behind RIB. So he's kind of a George Washington character, only he's a dwarf. He's a little person. I was thinking Peter Dinklage, or someone like him. You know, Peter Dinklage is an outstanding actor. I saw him in a Western with Hetfield, the guitar player, or the lead singer of Metallica. James Hetfield, yeah, James Hetfield was in it. It was a Western. It was called the Thicket or something like that. I think that's what the title was, The Thicket, or something. It was something like that. Anyway, that's definitely the third story. I think there's a fourth story. So, yeah, there's probably the fourth story would be the developed story between Lady Shelby. No. I'm sorry. The fourth story is between Jed Wilson and Droopy and Poopy, which is a sniper team that works for the dwarf. Which that's the next scene I'm going to be developing, is the one with Jed Wilson, and he's basically a sniper that was found in a trash can in Alaska by the dwarf and hired to be his front man, almost like a general. All right, so that brings us to Jed Wilson. Definitely the fourth part of the story, which I've already got into. Jed Wilson was a musician, very strange musician. He used to have a bi-level haircut. He was more into probably like Rat, round and round, what goes around comes around, you know, that band. He was like almost like a hair band guy. The only thing is he developed while he was in Seattle. So he followed the grunge scene for a while, got a van, got a band, probably mimic Nirvana, you know, play these different bars and stuff in Seattle, which Seattle's not a good place right now for a band to start up. I've heard this from a lot of other bands. It's a real tough area. It's gone real commercial, probably because of Nirvana's major success. Well, he doesn't do so good. He actually does pretty badly. Gets mad at his band, mad at the world. Probably messes around with too much stuff. Not even LSD, but probably the green. Messes around with a bunch of stuff. Finally decides to get in his van and leave. I think I had a leaving song too, and I can't remember what it was. But he actually ends up in Alaska from Seattle, which has probably happened before. Probably most likely looking for work. Kind of becomes like a Maddie Van Halen almost type a little bit, but not that mellow. More kind of like, I think I always pictured him as Brad Pitt. Even the older version of Brad Pitt from Once Upon a Time, but a little crazier. Anyway, he basically shows up with the orders of the dwarf. The dwarf can like look through these cameras and stuff, because Dwarf is like an amazing hacker. Okay, there's three major hackers going on. Dwarf definitely being one, but he's like got supercomputer hacking stuff. Probably the best hacker of them all. The dwarf, Daniel Kopex, is a hacker, and the Lone Star hacker, which we never see. Now, the Lone Star hacker might actually be just as good as the dwarf, but we never see him. Hence, Bradley Cooper. Yeah, I was thinking Bradley Cooper for the Lone Star hacker. You only see like shadows of him. You see him occasionally, and you hear his voice occasionally. Usually he'd speak with a voice that's like a voice changer kind of thing. He's kind of in the shadows. He's one of those type of characters. Deep Throat and All the President's Men kind of thing. Not even really that. He's not like a person that gives messages. He's a person that basically can hack into anything. He's like a crazy, crazy hacker. Okay, so that's the Lone Star hacker, as opposed to the dwarf, which probably can do about the same, but maybe with a help of team help. He's a very rich person. He became rich. He started off as a high school teacher, went up the sidewalk, and then ended up, a lot of money. Okay, so we've got the dwarf, right? And so, okay, so blah, 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 skip that. Now back to Jed Wilson's character. So he leaves Seattle, and he ends up meeting the dwarf at basically a 7-Eleven. Dwarf hires him on, basically tells him, I'll give you this amount of money, blah, 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 this and like, so he's probably, I would say, the, what's his name? Jed Wilson. Yeah, Jed Wilson's probably like in a little bit of trouble. He might have some, issues making money. Let's just put it that way. So the dwarf basically decides to pay him and gives him a Macmillan TAC, rifle that can fire, 50 caliber, I think they call it BMG, 50 BMG. Those are the big bullets that Chris Kyle used. I mean, and the smaller ones too. Like he can use the Macmillan TAC, right? So he basically, I guess we don't see that training, but it's kind of Remo Williams style kind of training, like secret training. So he basically gets the message from the dwarf, and we're like skip. I'm using the ellipsis like what Hemingway did, but he would skip. So all of a sudden, years have gone by. He's like a master, sniper, as good as Chris Kyle, and he basically meets the dwarf And then the dwarf gives him assignments or whatever. So he tells him about Droopy. And Droopy was living in a trash can in 7-Eleven. And like basically with one of those solo stoves, they're like a special type of stove that they're like smokeless stoves. Basically keep them warm, like you very much like almost like a caveman kind of thing. So Droopy's trained from the trash can to become like just as good of a sniper as Jed. Later, they will operate these drones from the side of the mountain and practice on this circus bear led by a lady named Lady Shroom, or actually it's Lady Shrum, but she's also nicknamed Lady Shroom. And she is basically kind of, I mean, these all could be like G.I. Joe characters nearly. It's not G.I. Joe though. G.I. Joe is one of my favorites, but she can work with any animal, especially a bear. Like she has like very good training. Like she can train a bear. People can actually train bears from like a little baby bear to, you know, regular bear. They're using the bear as almost kind of like, that's almost kind of like a pet. There's also a trained polar bear too. Oh, we get into another story, yeah. So the polar bear is kind of wandering around where Shep's at, and he's connected to Blackbird, who is Joseph Blackbird. Joseph Blackbird works the property of one of the reservations, which I wanted Benicio to look at, but also my friend Bobby Skez. He's basically this intelligent native that knows about the polar bear, and the polar bear also, Lady Shrum knows about they're like animal trainers, and she knows about the polar bear too, but it's also a pet, and they use it for training purposes, and I'll get into that later with drones. They drop honey on it, stuff like that. They just also use it as intimidation tactics. It's a freaking bear. You don't want a bear to be sicked on you. And there's a scene where they operate the drones around the bear. Basically, the bear in this big open ice field, a snowy field. And that's what we're going to get into next. Just a little note here on these drones. They're about the size of a beach ball. They have capabilities of thermal and night vision. They also have the capability of sonar and radar. They also have the capability of catching on to exact positioning of the moon at all times too, so it can travel pretty smartly. All right, 5.016 minutes. It'll take until 7:19 p.m. All right, so the drones can operate, and they vary in size. Like the ones that they'll be practicing with, they're not shaped like a beach ball, but they're about the size of a beach ball. The spherical, you know. Pretty good sized drones that can operate with ultrasonic, which is sonar. It operates also with radar. It also operates thermal, so it can see thermal, and it can see night vision. And it can pinpoint drop things. So that's basically, it's mostly practice. So they'll be dropping it on the bear, be little pellets of honey in bags, and Lady Shroom helps, and there's music involved in that scene. Okay, I gotta do some changes. It was actually the Mercury demos with John Hutchinson is the one that I wanted to use. It's a 1969 recording. I missed it by a year, so I'll have to go and fix that. But it did end up on the 1968 studio album known as Space Oddity. That's the one that's playing in his iPod is actually the Mercury recordings that was done in Mercury demos with John Hutchinson and David Bowie. Yeah, I watched another really good documentary. That's Fire Station Park. Another one that's a little bit based on Paradise Lost and Paradise Lost Part 2 called West of Memphis. And it actually explains almost exactly what went on with the West Memphis 3. You know, the Damon Echols and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking dogs ripped them apart. I was thinking animals did that. And it turned out it was snapping turtles. Because those snapping turtles, they go down those creeks and they get things that are dead that fall in, and also vegetation, and so they survive off that kind of stuff, and they go for tissue. So those people came forward. This is what the craziest stuff is. The people came forward that testified against the three and said under oath that they lied. The confession was a lie. Well, it was a forced confession from a special person, right? And the people came forward and said they lied. So they were actually innocent, and one was put on death row. He was just listening to Metallica. Metallica's not even satanic. Hell, Metallica, they don't even really mention much of... They're not like Slayer or anything. You know, they're basically hard rock. So I watched it, and I was just blown away. Eddie Vedder's in it. And they dismissed them. But they had to plead guilty in order to be dismissed, so they couldn't go back later and sue, which I think is, which is a wrongdoing on the side of the state of Arkansas. All took place in Arkansas in the Robin Hood Hills. I watched it and I was just blown away. I was like, wow. And they have photos. It's very graphic. I don't suggest it. It's a very, very enigmatic, puzzling documentary on both sides, Paradise Lost and west of Memphis. It's just amazing. You're like, wow, you're blown away when you watch it. You're like, this is absolutely unreal. And the saddest aspect of it is false confession. But they said that they had that boy in there, which is Jesse Miskelly, for more than 10 hours a day, drilling him on what to say, till they finally pushed on the recorder. That's just absurd. Now, that was hinted in the first Paradise Lost documentary. And then the second one came out. And then eventually, the truth prevailed. Like, as they say, the truth will prevail. But I'm trying to figure out, there's a mystery on it. The major mystery is, first of all, who tied them? That's the major mystery. Somebody tied them up. And that's what needs to be investigated, whether it's going to go on, because it was a Netflix series. Probably West of Memphis was on Netflix as well. And if it continues on, and they're wanting to uncover, like, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Damon Eccles is behind it. So is a lady named Amy. I think they're a married couple. He actually married in prison and on death row. Yeah, and so she must have known for sure he was innocent. And, well, nobody's innocent. You know what I mean? Like, nobody is. Everyone's born a sinner. But what I mean is, they want to continue the investigation to find out the truth behind it, and not to go around and point fingers like it was done to them. You know, not to go around and point fingers, but they want to find out who would tie them. And also, here's a weird thing. I don't want to point fingers if any step parents were involved or anything like that, because the bikes were left. What step parent would be that stupid to leave their bikes? And if they're trying to make it look like a drowning, why were they tied? That looks like it was done maybe by a juvenile, and that it was done by maybe a bully kid, possibly. Now, some people said they saw a man that went into a gas station with tattoos and he was covered in blood or something. There was a weirdo that was at a gas station that was covered in blood, and that was in the Paradise Lost one and whatever. But they also say, no one's thought like it was a local bully that was like almost joking around. Like, this is what I'm going to do to you, blah, blah, tie you up. Now, in my story, Rib, that's what ends up happening to Daniel. That something went wrong. I call it a failed baptism. And it was really like a drowning. But there's like a spiritual connection kind of thing. I saw it in another story, like the Ozarks or something like that. But anyway, who knows? You know, and also kids play around. You know, kids do things like tie themselves up and things like they do that. They will do that sometimes. It's not safe to do. But there has to be one, like another kid that may not could have controlled it and just kept it silent. Meaning he was partially tied, got untied, they all tied each other up, and then the next thing you know, he was dumped in, and the kid just never went forward because of guilt or whatever. You know, like, I'm just playing around and, you know, tying your hands, and then all of a sudden one falls in, and things can lead, you know, I mean, it could get really hairy, and then, you know, it could be, you know, maybe the other two were killed, because total 3 were drowned, and there's supposedly they say they were bludgeoned, but there was that thing that was a metal thing that goes across, and then there's the 3 bikes, and if they hit their head on that, that's the only mystery of it all right now for me, because, you know, they were innocent and released. Who tied them? And that's where the investigation would have to go forward. Supposedly they found stuff, but you know, they're always finding stuff that ends up to become a misnomer. You know, I wouldn't want to point fingers and attack really anyone, because you're not really supposed to do that. But it is there. You know, it's a documentary to be responded on, and the public did respond to it. It did free 3 innocent people because of the response of it. It's an important documentary. It didn't win any awards. I'm like, what in the world? I don't think it did. It might have won some awards. Here's a weird thing about west of Memphis is that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was produced by Damon Eccles from someone from Death Row. And what's interesting about it was, I think his wife was behind the direction of it. I think someone named Amy was directing behind it. I'd have to look if that was his wife or if that was a separate director. I'd have to look on that. It blows my mind to think, what in the world? How could this possibly? It's one of those things you watch, you're like, how could this possibly be happening? You know, or how could it happen? The only thing is what the Death Row guy says is, like, this is not uncommon. If you go back and you read the Bible, especially the New Testament, you'll find that the person that wrote that was on death row by the Romans. His name was Paul, and he was sentenced to death, and he got to write and release that information to let everybody know that was happening. And guess what he went in for? He went in for his beliefs.
Oh no, don't say